start you off with the important takeaway. If your gut tells you not to book that idyllic desert retreat with the suspiciously cheap rate and the host who texts exclusively in all caps, listen to it. My girlfriend Lena and I thought we'd scored the perfect couples getaway. The photos showed a sleek Adobe-style house nestled in the Arizona Badlands, surrounded by red rocks and silence. The host, Jesse, demanded a 50% deposit up front and said a PDF of rules longer than my college thesis. Rule 3 stood out to me. Guests must arrive in separate vehicles, no exceptions. When I asked why, Jesse replied, "Safety reasons." We shrugged it off. Lena's best friend, Claire, and her fiancé, Dev, agreed to caravan with us. 2 cars, 4 people, 0 sense of self-preservation. The first red flag wasn't a flag. It was a whole parade. The house was a 45-minute drive from the nearest gas station, down a dirt road the GPS refused to acknowledge. Jesse greeted us wearing a stained trucker hat and mirrored sunglasses, even though it was 8 p.m. His handshake lingered too long. "Glad y'all made it," he said, staring at Claire. "Real glad." The house itself was off. The furniture smelled like bleach and every window had blackout curtains. Rule 7. Curtains stay closed after dark. Jesse handed us keys to a basement panic room. "In case of, critters," he said, grinning. His teeth were the color of aged ivory piano keys. The first night we drank wine and laughed about the doomsday bunker vibes. Then at 3 a.m. we heard tires crunching on gravel. Headlights swept the curtains. Lena peeked. "It's Jesse's truck," she whispered. "He's just sitting there." We joked about paranoid desert folk. We didn't joke when it happened again the next night. And then the next. Always between 2 to 4 a.m., engine idling, his shadow motionless behind the wheel. Dev texted Jesse. "Everything okay?" The reply. "Just checking in. Sleep tight." The 4th night, Claire woke up screaming. "There's someone in the house," she hissed. We froze. Downstairs, floorboards creaked. A slow, deliberate rhythm. Step, drag, step, drag. Jeff grabbed a fire poker. My hands shook so hard I could barely dial 911. No signal. We locked ourselves in the panic room. The footsteps stopped. Then, a muffled voice. "Y'all ain't playing fair." Jesse. Jesse wasn't some backwoods psycho. He was smarter. The panic room door had no handle on the outside, but it didn't have one on the inside either. We were rats in a trap. When the Wi-Fi router, conveniently bolted to the wall, buzzed to life, Jesse's voice crackled through a hidden intercom. "Don't worry, help's coming." The help arrived at sunrise, a rusted van with Nevada plates. 2 men got out. Jesse tossed them a key. "All 4, he said. "Fresh." We'd missed the clues, the separate cars, so no one could leave with all of us. The bleach to erase traces of prior guests. The panic room, soundproof, windowless, pre-staged. We weren't renters, we were inventory. But here's where Jesse messed up. Dev played college football, and the panic room door opened inward. I won't describe the next part in detail. Just know that Dev broke Jesse's nose with a fire poker. Lena smashed the router. We ran, they chased. Claire's Honda had a dead battery, so we crammed into Dev's Jeep. Tires skidded as we fishtailed onto the highway. The cops found 3 bodies buried behind the house. Women, all missing persons from nearby states. Jesse's still out there, though. They never caught the men in the van. We moved cities, changed our numbers, but every time I see an Airbnb ad, I hear Jesse's drawl in my head. "Sleep tight." Don't be like us. Check the reviews, and if the host demands separate cars, maybe reconsider. My vacation to the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore was supposed to be a relaxing escape, a chance to disconnect from the world and reconnect with nature. It became something else entirely. I almost didn't make it back. I'd booked a small, isolated cabin on one of the less visited islands, accessible only by a short ferry ride. The photos online showed a rustic but charming place, perfect for a solo retreat. I needed some serious quiet after a messy breakup and a stressful few months at work. The ferry dropped me off on a gray, drizzly afternoon. The island was eerily quiet, the only sound the gentle lapping of the waves against the rocky shore. The cabin was even more secluded than I'd anticipated, nestled deep in a thick forest of birch and pine. The first few days were bliss. I hiked the trails, explored hidden coves, and read books I'd been meaning to get to for ages. The silence was almost deafening at first, but I quickly grew accustomed to it, even relished in it. I started to feel like myself again. Then the fog rolled in. This wasn't just any fog. It was a thick, impenetrable blanket that swallowed the island whole. I woke up one morning and couldn't see more than a few feet beyond the cabin's porch. The silence, which had been comforting before, now felt oppressive, heavy. I tried to hike, but quickly became disoriented, the familiar trails vanishing in the dense white. I had to turn back, my heart pounding in my chest. Stuck inside, I started to notice things. The cabin, which had seemed so charming at first, now felt strange. The windows rattled in the wind, even though there wasn't much wind. The floorboards creaked nonstop, even when I stood still. I told myself it was just an old cabin settling, but a nagging feeling persisted, a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. One evening, the fog seemed to press right up against the windows, a swirling gray mass that obscured everything. I was reading, trying to distract myself, when I heard a scratching sound. It was faint but persistent, coming from somewhere outside. I froze and listened intently. It sounded like fingernails on wood. My breath hitched. I told myself it was a branch rubbing against the cabin, but the scratching was too rhythmic, too deliberate. I got up and peered cautiously through the window. The fog was so thick that I could barely see anything, but I thought I saw something move in the periphery, a dark shape just beyond the edge of the porch. I backed away from the window, my heart racing. I grabbed a heavy poker from beside the fireplace, my hand shaking. The scratching continued, louder now, more insistent. It seemed to be coming from the side of the cabin, near the bedroom window. I crept towards the bedroom, my senses on high alert. The scratching stopped. I held my breath, listening. Silence. Then, a deep, sharp thump against the wall, right behind my head. I jumped, spinning around. There was nothing there, just the bare wall. I let out a shaky breath, trying to calm myself. It was just the wind, just the old cabin playing tricks on my frayed nerves. But the scratching began again, and this time it was accompanied by a low, guttural groan. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my backpack, shoved some essentials inside, and bolted out the front door. I didn't even think about the fog, about getting lost. I just needed to get away from that cabin. I ran blindly through the fog, stumbling over rocks and tree roots. The scratching and groaning seemed to follow me, echoing through the dense white. I could hear the waves crashing against the shore, a faint beacon in the swirling gray. I kept running, driven by pure terror. Finally, I reached the dock. The ferry wasn't due for hours, but I didn't care. I huddled under the small shelter, shivering and gasping for breath, listening to the sounds of the island. Scratching and groaning had stopped, but the silence was now even more terrifying. It felt like the island was holding its breath, waiting. When the ferry finally arrived, I scrambled aboard, not even looking back at the island. I didn't relax until we were miles away, the fog receding into the distance. I never went back to those islands. I tried to rationalize what happened, to explain it away. Maybe it was just the wind, the old cabin, my imagination running wild. But I know what I heard, and I know what I felt. That feeling of being watched, of being hunted. A few weeks later, I did some research. I found out the cabin's previous owner had been a recluse, a man who'd lived alone on the island for years. He had died suddenly, his body found by a park ranger after neighbors reported not seeing him for a few weeks. The official cause of death was listed as a heart attack, but some of the locals whispered a different story. They said he'd gone mad, driven by the isolation, by the silence. They said he'd talked to the trees, to the animals, to the fog itself. They also said he'd been a woodworker, obsessed with carving intricate designs into the wood of his cabin. They said he'd often work late into the night, the sound of his tools echoing across the still island. I never found out what made that scratching sound for sure. The Park Service inspected the cabin after my report, and they said there was nothing unusual. No animals, no loose branches, no sign of forced entry, just an old cabin in a quiet, lonely place. But I know what I heard, and I know that I'll never forget it. Sometimes late at night when the wind howls outside my window, I hear it again, faintly in the distance, and I know, deep down, that some secrets are best left undisturbed. never thought I'd be making a Reddit post from a hospital bed in rural Thailand, but I need to warn others about the hidden beach paradise that travel influencers keep raving about on social media. 3 weeks ago, my girlfriend Maya and I were scrolling through Thailand travel posts when we found an influencer's viral video about a secret cove near Koh Lanta. The video showed crystalline wonders, limestone cliffs, and not another soul in sight. After 2 weeks of crowded tourist spots, this looked exactly like what we needed. The video had specific coordinates in the description, and the video mentioned hiring a local named Somchai who knew the route. It took us a few days, but we managed to track him down through the guest house where we were staying. He seemed hesitant at first. When we showed him screenshots from the video, his expression changed. He agreed to take us there next morning for 3,000 baht. Much more than typical boat tours, but we figured it was worth it for a private paradise. We set out at dawn. The morning was unusually still, with no wind and a thick haze hanging over the water. Somchai's wooden long-tailed boat cut through the glassy surface as we headed south. After about an hour, we rounded a massive limestone cliff and saw the cove. It looked exactly like the video, a perfect crescent of white sand embraced by towering cliffs, with a small freshwater stream trickling down one side. Somchai anchored about 50 meters from shore, saying the coral made it impossible to get closer. As Maya and I swam toward the beach, I noticed he stayed on the boat, his eyes fixed on the cliffs above us. I should have recognized his unease for what it was. Not superstition, but legitimate concern. The beach was even more beautiful up close. The sand was powder soft, and the limestone walls created a natural amphitheater that amplified the gentle lapping of the waves. We spent the morning swimming and taking photos. Around noon, Maya decided to follow the freshwater stream up into a narrow gorge, hoping to find the waterfall shown in the video. Stayed behind to set up our picnic lunch. 20 minutes passed, then 30. After 45 minutes, I started calling her name. The gorge created strange echoes that made it impossible to tell where sounds were coming from. After an hour, I was screaming myself hoarse. Somchai must have heard me because he swam to shore. When I told him Maya had gone up the gorge, his face went pale. He pulled out his phone and showed me a Thai news article from 2 months ago. The photo showed the same cove, but the headline was in Thai. He translated, "2 more tourists missing after illegal mining causes cave-in." It turns out this hidden paradise was actually an abandoned illegal mining site. The limestone cliffs are riddled with unstable tunnels from decades of mining. The freshwater stream Maya followed, its runoff from the old mine shafts, which are now partially flooded and still occasionally collapse. A waterfall in that video didn't exist. They'd never actually been here. They'd stolen photos from other locations and stitched them together for views. The next 12 hours were a blur of police boats, rescue teams, and the most terrifying waiting game of my life. I finally found Maya trapped in a partially flooded tunnel, her leg pinned under fallen rocks. She'd been following the stream when the ground gave way beneath her, dropping her into an old mining shaft. She'd survived by finding an air pocket and staying calm enough to listen for the rescue team's signals. The doctors say she'll walk again, but it'll take months of rehab. The police shut down the cove and are investigating several travel influencers who have been promoting it. Turns out we weren't the first to be lured in by fake social media posts, just the first to make it out alive. So please, if you're planning a trip to Thailand and see posts about the secret paradise, know that it's not just another hidden gem being ruined by social media. It's an active disaster site that unscrupulous influencers are using to gain followers without any regard for human life. Maya's asleep now, heavily sedated. Every time she closes her eyes, she says that she's back in that flooded tunnel, listening to rocks shift above her in the darkness, wondering if each breath might be her last. The doctors say the physical wounds will heal, but I'm not sure either of us will ever see those picture-perfect social media travel posts the same way again. We came looking for an escape from tourist crowds and found something far worse, a reminder that sometimes places are hidden for very good reasons. And Emma mentioned I tried to hike, but quickly became disordered. Bro.